I guess
And
I'd
we
be
have
Crystal. Hi, Crystal.
Okay, thank you. So good afternoon, everyone. Thank you all for joining us today for our second session of the First Fridays with Fairbanks series. This series is made possible by the IU Alumni Association and the Richard Fairbanks School of Public Health Alumni Board. The Alumni Association is hosting such live Zoom events from January until May, so every week, the first Friday, featuring a select student and a faculty member. Each session is recorded for those unable to join in real time. And today's session is hosted by the Department of Global Health within Indiana University's Fairbanks School of Public Health. We will be speaking today with Dr. Max Moreno, a PhD, who is an associate professor at the Department of Environmental Health Science, part of our School of Public Health, about animal agriculture and human pandemics. Just a few words about the geography today, which I spoke already, but Dr. Moreno was born and raised in Colombia, from where he is connecting right now. And he teaches undergraduate and graduate public health students here at Fairbanks. His expertise includes environmental health, food, water and sanitation, public health applications of geographic information systems even. Professor Moreno is calling us from the city of Bogota in Colombia, which is the third highest capital in the world, located more than 2,600 meters high above the sea level, which is 8,600 feet above the sea level. It's an equatorial and a tropical country without any real change of seasons and almost the same temperatures throughout the year. And I'm Ainur Aiypkhanova, a first-year Doctor of Public Health program student here at IU Fairbanks School of Public Health. And I'm living in and connecting from the capital of Kazakhstan, called Nur-Sultan, the second coldest capital in the world, located on flat steppes between Russia and China, with snow from like November till March and hot summers. So together with Professor Moreno and many of you joining us today, we are probably a fair representation of a global health team here at IU. Dr. Moreno will tell us about virus-borne human pandemics and other global health issues today. We will talk about virus transmission from animals, called zoonotic, to human beings through factors that we can impact, probably, hopefully, as civilized people. Factors such as intensity of agriculture, or maybe the way we fly and travel. And I'm delighted also to greet another contributor to today's lecture. That's Dr. Stefan J., who is with us here, I guess. Yeah, he promised me he would be connecting. He is Professor Emeritus and a Doctor of Medicine pulmonologist and a renowned figure in public health. He is a past founding chair of the IU Richard Fairbanks School of Public Health, and Dr. J has collaborated with Dr. Moreno by contributing some of the slides. And message to the audience, throughout the event, please utilize the chat box. You can type your questions for Dr. Moreno, for maybe Dr. Stefan J, and initiate conversation with other members through chat. We'll be having some pause for questions in the middle of the presentation, like maybe in 20, 15 minutes from now, and then another round of questions at the end of the presentation. So hopefully we'll try to get to all the questions we have. We appreciate your interest in global public health, and let us start by introducing our main speaker's background a little bit. Dr. Moreno earned his PhD in public health with a major in environmental health from the University of South Florida and completed a NASA postdoctoral program at Marshall Space Flight Center in Huntsville, Alabama. Dr. Moreno is also a 2019 TEDx speaker in Indianapolis and a member of several professional national societies, award-winning public health researcher. So now please join me in welcoming Dr. Moreno. Dr. Moreno, the floor is yours. You can start your presentation.
Thanks, Ainur. Thanks for the nice introduction. And thanks to Crystal for organizing this event. So, hello, everyone. Well, I'm very glad to see this such a nice attendance to talk about a topic that is so much of my interest, as is animal agriculture. So I will share my screen with all of you so I can show my PowerPoint. So here it is. While I adjust my PowerPoint, just let me say a minor correction. I am not in Bogota, I am in Cartagena, which is actually at the sea level. I didn't understand when you were talking about Bogota before. I thought you were just talking about the capital of my country, but I didn't know you were meaning that I was in Bogota. I am actually in Cartagena, which is at the sea level. So,
Thanks for
okay.
clarification. Yeah.
Yeah. So we are gonna talk about animal agriculture and pandemics. And as you know, the conversation today about public health is dominated by COVID. So one may wonder why to talk about agriculture when the interesting thing right now is COVID. So I will use these slides to guide a conversation to explain why is that. So when see these images and we see this crowding of animals, we start understanding why the conversation about intensive animal agriculture is important to be considered as a factor for public health. And it's not just agriculture, it's animal agriculture, and more specifically, it's intensive animal agriculture. There is a huge difference between intensive animal agriculture and traditional agriculture. So let's start talking about zoonotic virus. So let's start with the easy definition of what zoonotic viruses are. Basically, viruses that jump from animals to humans. So we can go a little more complicated than that and say something like those are viruses that can complete their cycles both in animals or in humans. But let's stick to the simple one, that of animals, virus that jump from animals to humans. And let's bring the example of the famous SARS-CoV-2, the virus responsible for COVID-19. So the most accepted hypothesis about the origin of this current pandemic is that of a virus that jumped from the bat to the pangolin and from the pangolin to humans. And all this process happened in a wet market in Wuhan, China, where there were a lot of animals from many different species crowded together, and where the animals were sacrificed on the spot. So the animals got exposed to the blood of other animals. Humans got exposed to the blood of those animals and to aerosols that were suspended in the air and released by those animals. So that's COVID-2. But let's bring also the example of the Spanish flu, the pandemic of 1918. So for that, the process was the proposed process was kind of different. So here we have a human flu, we have a bird flu. The human flu is very well adjusted to humans. Of course, the bird flu is very well adjusted to bird. So what we understand by very well adjusted, this flu, the human flu, is very infectious to humans, but is not lethal to humans. So it is not in the interest of the virus to be lethal. The virus doesn't want to kill its host, because if it kills its host, then it stops right there. The transmission stops right there. So the virus want to be mild to his host in order to let the host to be able to move around. So by the host moving around, he can come in contact with other potential hosts, and the opportunity of transmission of the virus to those other hosts happen. So that's how the transmission keeps going. So the evolution is not just on the virus becoming mild and becoming more infectious, also on the host. The host evolved to become more resistant to the virus. But that host is not resistant to the virus of the birds, right? So, and the virus of the birds has also not evolved to be infectious to humans. So there is no chance that the lethal virus of the birds will affect humans. That's the lucky case. However, in very rare occasions, maybe hosts like, in this case, let's say the pig, which also in very rare occasion could be infected by human flu and could also be infected by a bird flu. So in this very rare, extremely rare event in which both type of flu, humans and birds, will meet in the pig, then there is a small probability that they could exchange genetic material, and a very rare possibility that one of those resulting viruses with the exchange material could inherit the ability of the human flu to infect humans and could inherit the ability of the bird flu to be lethal to humans. So that's extremely rare to happen, but it might happen. And if that happens, that means serious trouble. That may explain why the Spanish flu of 1918 killed about 50 million people. And that was a time when the world population was only 1.7 billion people. So in a population like the one we have today, of 7.8 billions, that would mean about 229 million deaths. So that is the reason of concern in regard to intensive animal agriculture, that those very rare cases where the two viruses could meet, they are very rare to happen, let's say, in one pig. But if you have two pigs, then you have twice the chance. And if you have 3 pigs and 4 pigs, and then that probability is increases at the same rate. Then if you have a farm where you have an industrial farm where you may have even 20,000 pigs, then that very tiny possibility is multiplied by 20,000. May still be an insignificant probability, but then if you consider that there are many industrial farms like that, then that small probability start adding up, and then it becomes not insignificant anymore. So that is that's the reason for concern. So in fact, we see that if you analyze let's say just the time period between 1980 to 2010, you see that the number of disease outbreaks caused by zoonotic virus have been on the rise. And then if we analyze just the time period between 2000 and 2018, you can appreciate that it seems to be an increase in the frequency of this type of epidemics. So we have in 2003 SARS, we have in 2004 the avian flu, in 2009 the swine flu, 2012 the MERS, then the Ebola in 2014, Zika in 2015, and so on. So you see that the frequency seems to be increasing as the time passes by. So then the logical consequence to think about is what would be the reasons that may be explaining this behavior, this apparent increasing frequency of likelihood of this type of outbreak to happen. So of course, one of the very first candidates to think about is the accelerating speed of world travel. By the time of the Spanish flu, it used to take around 25 days for somebody to travel from London to Hong Kong. And then by the time of the COVID pandemic, it takes just few hours for somebody to travel from the same place from London to Hong Kong. So if you see this map with the airline's route coming and leaving from the United States, you can see that those airlines routes coming and leaving from New York and LA are very busy. So no wonder why the first cases of COVID in the United States happen precisely in those cities, in New York and in LA. And then it is not just that the easy for travel of people, it's also the growing easy for travel of good. And in this regard, it's interesting to mention the case of a mosquito, because with the transport of goods could be, those goods could carry vectors of infectious diseases. So this case I wanna bring in regard to this idea is the case of the Aedes albopictus. This is a mosquito that came from the Southeast Asia to the United States, to Florida. It came in a shipment of tire. If you have noticed, a tire, when it's outside exposed to the rain, it gets filled with water, and it doesn't matter how you move that tire, it always keeps the water inside. So that storage of water in that tire is a breeding site for mosquitoes. So in this shipment of tires that came from Singapore to Florida, the Aedes albopictus laid the eggs in that water, and then those eggs came to the United States, and they hatch in Florida, and then they start spreading, and now they have advanced throughout almost the entire American continent. Just the very cold areas have not reached yet for this species. But why is it special? What is the concern with this Aedes albopictus? Because it's the second best vectors for diseases like Zika, chikungunya, dengue, and yellow fever. So then that's the concern with the free trading and the possibility for transport of vectors of infectious diseases. So I'm going to briefly talk about one of those free trade agreements, NAFTA. Those free trade agreements often include a chapter on foreign direct investment. So this foreign direct investment means that corporations can build factories or industrial farms in other countries. So one of these corporations that has a headquarters in the United States built an industrial farm of pigs in Mexico. So it has been proposed, has not been proven yet, but it has been proposed that in this industrial farm in Mexico that was created under the chapter of NAFTA may have been the source of the swine flu of 2009. So that is just a typical example of how this free trading may help in this process, or in this increasing probability of outbreaks of zoonotic diseases to happen. So it is very widely known that also antibiotic resistance is a serious consequence and serious problems out of industrial animal agriculture. That crowding of animals increases the chances of transmission of diseases, increases the chances of transmission of bacteria, and then these farms apply huge amounts of antibiotics in order to prevent the transmission of diseases caused by, let's say, bacteria. So this dose that is applied is not lethal for all the bacteria. So few bacteria survive, and then their offspring inherit that strain to survive the antibiotic, and that's how this resistance grows. So that is what Alexander Fleming talked about when he discovered the penicillium, about the risk of using doses that are not lethal for the bacteria. So the other also widely known problem of industrial animal agriculture is the production of waste. This huge amount of waste that is produced by the industrial farms finds its way into waterways, and it fertilizes the waterways, and it triggers the growth of harmful algae blooms, which are a serious concern in public health because of the toxins that are released via water, air, and aquatic food to humans. So just like in the intensive animal agriculture, which is based on monoculture, the likelihood for transmission of diseases is high, and that's why the need to apply, let's say, antibiotics. Also, in industrial plant agriculture, also based in monoculture, the possibility of transmission of diseases is high, far higher than in the normal type of agriculture that is more diverse, that is polyculture. So that implies a huge amount of pesticides that also have a public health effect. And because the soils used for this type of agriculture, the intensive agriculture, have been depleted of nutrients because of the abuse in the extraction of those nutrients by the crops, then there is the need to apply growing amount of fertilizers that also find their way with the runoff into the waterways and also contribute to the problem of harmful algae blooms. So, and all that is not mentioning one of the aspects by which industrial animal agriculture have been attacked the most and that is in regard to global warming, and basically because of the methane that is released by cows. That is very questionable. I'm gonna talk a little bit about that because yes, that is true, but there is a little more to talk about it. So that is how we come to the complement of this section about pandemics, which is how climate change may have a factor to do with all this thing of the effect of industrial farming into public health and into pandemics. I know that we're supposed to talk about 10 minutes and then come to questions, but you tell me, Ainur, if I can continue or it's good that we just can stop in here.
I think let's stick to our original plan and maybe pause for some questions.
Okay.
So we have a great attendance today. So thanks to Crystal for organizing this. I just wanted to say that chat box is active. So let me see if there are any questions here.
So can you tell me the questions, Ainur, if you don't mind?
Yeah, sure, I will. But I guess just a second, I'm trying to open the box. Okay, so there is one just a kind of general question that's coming to me privately, which is, in your opinion, what can we as a humanity do to better manage our farms in a sustainable way in the near future?
Well, that's a very important question and related to the end of the topic of this conversation, which is about sustainability. So I'm very happy to do a brief, to talk about that a little early. Sustainable farms are those that are more diverse, that those follow the patterns of ecosystems. So any type of human process of human development that is similar, the closer it is to the ecological pattern of diversity, the more the chances are for sustainability. So the traditional type of agriculture that is based on polyculture, it means you grow different species. That type of agriculture is better adapted to satisfaction of feeding needs from the people at the local level, but it's not well adjusted to filling a shipping container that need to be exported to another country. So the monoculture is easier to fill a shipping container with monoculture because you have all the extension with only one product, as opposed to filling a shipping container with polyculture when you have a little bit of this, a little bit of this, a little bit of this. So that's why the global trading favor monoculture over polyculture. But monoculture is not sustainable because of the problems we have been discussed, because the effect into the environment, because of the effect into public health, like this of the favoritism for emergence of unknown viruses, or even sometimes viruses that have been controlled in the past may re-emerge. So that type of conditions are more favorable with monoculture, and that's the reason why this type of agriculture are not sustainable. That's one of the reasons, just from the point of view of public health. And there are plenty of reasons if you consider also the point of view of environment. So the conversation can go very far in this regard, but probably for the sake of answering other questions, hopefully the idea has been come across to this point.
Thank you for answering that question. This is almost to me like reminding the Adam Smith reading Wealth of Nations, the philosophical thing we have studied in the fall semester, you know, the specialization over diversity of occupations, which one is economically more prosperous or profitable, but which one is probably not sustainable or not as good for the nature and as a result for the whole humanity. So we have another question, from our participant. Her name is Sally Macy. She has a hand rising here in the chat function. So Sally, you can maybe turn on your mic and ask your question directly, please.
Hi, my question actually was already answered, so I'll pass to the next question.
Okay.
Oh, isn't that amazing? We think similarly in this audience. Okay, so there's another, there's another question from Samuel Audley. If I mispronounce, please forgive me. How do we balance this risks with the need to feed the world? Many people still starving or suffering from our poor nutrition. Very true.
Yes, in fact, that has been exposed as the main reason that will excuse or will support the growth of industrial farming, because there is a high production of food with industrial farming. But again, there is a high production of food with industrial farming. And if we consider that there is a growing population, we are already 8.9 billions, and the number keeps growing. And our agricultural land, that land that is very propitious for agriculture, is already taken, has been already exploited and overexploited. Then the solution seems to be industrial agriculture, because it can produce more food in less area. But the point with that is that, yes, it produces more food in less area, but of only one type, of only one species. Let's say, for instance, if you have a given area and you explore it in industrial agriculture, it means you will have far more production of only one species of monoculture, let's say corn, that if you have in that same given area, if you have corn, beans, yucca, plantains, if you have all those different products, you compare the production of corn in monoculture and the production of corn in polyculture, of course, you will have far more corn in monoculture. And with that far more corn produced in just one area, you more easily can fill up a shipping container and send it to another country. As opposed to in polyculture, when you only have a little production of corn. However, if you add the production of corn, the production of yucca, the production of beans, the production of plantain, and the production of all those products that grow in polyculture, then you have far more food. You have far more food, but then you cannot fill a shipping container to export to another continent. That type of agriculture will be better adjusted to local markets to satisfy the feeding needs of the people at the local level. But the other one is better adjusted to satisfy the needs of feeding far away in another continent.
Mm-hmm.
So,
okay, we have a couple more questions. Professor Moreno, let me, if is it okay if I read them now, or you?
Sure, please.
Okay, so there's one here. Wait a second, where did it go? About NAFTA. So did NAFTA increase trade of livestock? I'm trying to better understand how NAFTA caused or connected to the swine flu pandemic, how it is connected, if it is. It's from, the question is from Tamila Garbus, yeah.
Okay, so those free trade agreements, they often include a chapter on foreign direct investment And those chapters allow the possibility of corporations to build factories in other places where labor is cheaper, where taxes may be lower, where environmental regulation may be more relaxed. So then they transport their factory to those places. Then what happened? Because in those places, regulations, environmental regulations may be more relaxed, then it's gonna be less obstruction to, let's say, the pollution that is produced by the waste of the pig the industrial farm of pigs. So as I say, the huge amount of waste that is produced by these industrial farms is a very important factor for pollution of waterways, for eutrophication of water, for harmful algae blooms. Then if the environmental regulations against that release of waste is lower, then there is an advantage for this corporation to build that huge industrial farm in a place where they are not gonna obstruct the farm because of the waste that is produced. Then as a result, they build the industrial farm in there. They have their 20,000 pigs in there. And as we see that for each jump from one pig to the next, there is a possibility, an insignificant probability for the virus to mutate to something that could eventually be harmful to humans. Then that insignificant possibility is multiplied 20 times if there are 20 pigs, 20,000 pigs in that farm. So that's how we could connect free trade agreements like NAFTA with the possibility of a epidemic like the swine flu in 2009.
We have another kind of question which is related to what you said. John Metzger says, I think China consumes 10 times more the pork of the entire US population. Are we suggesting China shouldn't produce its own pork to feed themselves? Don't we complicate this issue even more with no trade animal protein? What is the idea animal sourced protein Dr. Max Moreno prefers? I didn't quite maybe understand the very last sentence, so maybe the author of the question can jump in with the microphone, but you can start if you have any ideas to this. And after this this question, we will go back to the remainder of the presentation, and then the rest of the questions will be answered at the end of the presentation.
So here we go into that old debate about if proteins could be taken only from plant source in order to be more environmentally friendly, or it is true that we require at least a portion of the protein coming from animal source. That is a debate that is still going, and I don't have the answer for that, but I can tell you that even with animal protein, there is a way to supply animal protein in ways that are not so harmful to the environment and to public health. I have the very last slide, one of the last slides of this presentation actually talk about that. And that way of supply that type of animal protein without that much harmful effect on the environment is linked to the need of having diversity, of having polyculture, of having, which is also the requirement for sustainability. So because it mimics the pattern of ecosystem, which is based on diversity, then there is no wonder why that harmful effect is lower. So yeah, we could still receive our protein from animals. It's just industrial farming what is here under the scrutiny, not just production of protein animal in general.
Okay. I will just read out a comment by Jeffrey Ashby. It seems like we need advances in techniques such as three sisters, corn, beans, squash in the same whole agriculture for both plants and animals. So with this comment, let's move on, Professor Moreno, with the rest of your presentation and then continue. Thanks.
Sure. All right. So thank you so much for all those questions. And yes, the comment of Ashby is very true. That is exactly diversity. That's what is needed for human processes to be sustainable. Okay, so why to talk then about climate change? In this pie chart, we have that agriculture, forestry, and other land use compose the second most important factor as in the emissions of greenhouse gases. However, if you remove forestry and other land use from there, agriculture will come down to probably something like 10%. So you will say that animal agriculture could be responsible for something about like 10% of the greenhouse gases, which is of course a serious concern. However, there is more to talk about that, and we will talk about that later on. So this is how the global historical greenhouse gas emission look. You see, it's coming high. And then along with that increase in those gases, you are very likely very familiar with those curves of temperature and concentration of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere and how they grow parallel, and also how that curve of temperature also grow parallel with the curve of sea level. And with that increase in the sea level, we have problems like this in coastal areas like Cartagena, the city. That is the city where I am right now. And this is, you will say, well, that looks like Venice. It's not Venice, it's just my hometown. Each time that there is not even a heavy rain event, just a medium-sized rain event cause this problem. And that's happened because my city was built by the Spanish almost at the sea level. So it was built 500 years ago. At that time, the Spanish didn't have any problem with flooding when it rise. But this problem is being increasingly more and more frequent because the level of the street is almost at the same level that the level of the sea. So then when it rains, the water cannot run off fast enough to get rid of the water. So the water flood, and that's what happened. And this type of problem will be increasingly being more and more common with the sea level rise, with global warming, with those events, with those natural weather events. Then there is the consequence of on the difficulty to cover in cases of COVID. So when you are in a pandemic, in cases of COVID, no, in cases of pandemic in general, when you have a pandemic, that is not a good time to have a strong weather event, a natural disaster. And also those natural disasters, they affect the public health infrastructure and make the population more vulnerable to infections and to those epidemics to happen. So it goes in both ways. In pandemics, it's difficult to respond to natural disasters, and natural disasters disrupt public health and make it more propensious, the population more propensious to the transmission of infectious diseases. In fact, that's what explains why in the United States, diseases like Zika, chikungunya, and dengue are not prevalent, because those diseases are strongly linked to the housing infrastructure, the public health infrastructure. And in the United States, there is a good condition of housing. There are good condition of public health infrastructure, of sanitation, of sewer, of drinking water, of electricity. So people don't need to store water. And then people don't have to have those breeding sites for mosquitoes. People have air conditioners, so they don't need to open the window and the mosquitoes enter. So that those good living conditions explain why there is not dengue, Zika, chikungunya, yellow fever in the United States. But yellow fever was prevalent in the United States before 1903. So during the 19th century, yellow fever killed more than 100,000 people in the United States. But at that time, the housing conditions in the United States were similar to the housing conditions in developing countries. So that is the main reason, and not temperature, against what most people think, that because of temperature, we don't have dengue in the United States. Temperature help, yes, that is a factor, but the main factor is housing conditions, public health infrastructure. That is the main reason that explaining why those diseases are more prevalent in developing countries, because those countries have lower housing conditions, lower infrastructure of public health. Under that situation, always those more affected are the minorities, because minorities are those more likely to live under those conditions of low quality. They are those more likely to live under conditions that may favor the transmission of infectious diseases. They are also those more likely to have to work physically. They don't work remotely because they don't have work related to internet, but physical work, and then they get more exposed. So all those conditions will be more prevalent on minorities and groups less favored economically. And again, related to COVID, we see that the sector that is more affected by COVID has been the group of people working in processing of meat. And those are people that belong to those low socioeconomic conditions. And those are the people that are in need to be exposed to other people because their work rely on physical contact. So all these things happen in times where public health, there is a transition in epidemiology. So infectious diseases, which are more prevalent on their poor conditions in developing countries, or even in developed countries, but in those sectors more depressed. So those diseases are decreasing. And then those diseases that are chronic are increasing. So that was being the case. The chronic diseases were coming up, infectious diseases were coming down as the advance of medical technology, vaccines, all the benefit of the technological medicine are coming into place, are controlling those infectious diseases. So they were coming down. So that trend then started changing recently with the situation we are seeing about these new epidemics that are happening. So that make us wonder about if that transition of epidemiology may have an inflection point. So you see, for instance, global life expectancy at birth is getting better. The percentage of death from non-communicable diseases is going up. And then to ensure condition, and that's why I say that one of the questions was related to some of my last slides because they relate to sustainability. That's how when we have to think about conditions that could ensure that that improvement that we see in parameters like this will continue. So that's why we need to think about sustainability, and that's how we have to think about what are the requirements for sustainability. And among those requirements is the point that I mentioned about following or mimicking as much as possible the patterns of ecosystem. And a typical characteristic of the pattern of ecosystem is diversity as opposed to monoculture. And that will be the condition to make a balance between people, planet, and profit. which is the requirement for sustainability. And this is the slide I was mentioning earlier when I say that animal protein is still possible. It's not that we're gonna remove animal protein totally from the option. We may still keep it. The thing is that we should just reduce it, and the reduced amount that we consume, we should make sure that it's not originated from industrial animal agriculture, but the traditional type of agriculture. In fact, this is the point where I was talking about the greenhouse gases, because the cows have been vilified as responsible for global warming because the cows burn methane. As you all know, methane is about 25 times more potent as a greenhouse gas than CO2, than carbon dioxide. Yes, it's 25 times more potent than carbon dioxide, but the methane only lasts in the environment few years, while the carbon dioxide lasts in the environment more than 1,000 years. And the other thing is that, okay, the cows release methane, which is a potent greenhouse gas, but the pasture that are required to support those cows, they can store carbon. They can work as a storage of carbon. So the carbon that those traditional pasture lands for traditional cattle raising, the amount of carbon that can be stored in that soil it compensates far the amount of carbon that is released by the cows when they burn methane. But that situation, that sinking of carbon in the soil that happened in the traditional type of animal agriculture, it doesn't happen in the industrial type of animal agriculture, because in this industrial type of animal agriculture, you don't have a happy cow grazing on the pasture, grazing on the savanna. You have a stressed cow eating concentrated formulated food in a stall where you have another cows next to it and another cow next to it, and you have all the cows concentrated in a very limited area. So they are then producing a huge amount of waste in that limited area. They are producing a huge amount of methane in that limited area, and they are not contributing to the enrichment of the soil by favoring organic matter in the soil that's gonna work as a storage of carbon. Carbon that in the industrial farm will be released into the air. In the traditional farm, that carbon will be stored in the soil. So that's the huge difference between those two types of agriculture. One is actually environmentally friendly, the other is extremely environmentally harmful. And there is an interesting video on Netflix that's called Kiss the Ground, which I recommend in that regard, if you wanna watch. And of course, those are the Sustainable Development Goals. The goal is to achieve them by 2030. They were set in 2015. So this objective of, let's say, of a sustainable way of agriculture totally fit those goals, because we'll not just favor them from the point of view of the environment, but also from the point of view of public health. So they totally are aligned with this traditional type of agriculture, or based on diversity, based on polyculture as opposed to monoculture. And then there is this book that I also recommend. It's called Big Farms Make Big Food, which also explains very well this linkage between industrial farming and pandemics. So with that, I believe I finished my slide, so I am open to questions.
Thank you so much, Professor Moreno. I think this was really interesting. We have one question actually that have come in the middle of the presentation from Paul Levy. Are there particular cities or even countries that are not dependent on the monocultural system and that serve as models for others to consider a more polycultural and local-based approach?
Nice question. In general, developing countries are those more, let's say, common to have those type of traditional agriculture, because the infrastructure, and that's the lucky thing, that the infrastructure to implement, to build those type of farms is very expensive. So developing countries don't have the means to build this type of factory farms. However, now with those chapters in foreign direct investment, now that's what the example I gave in Mexico, and also in Southeast Asia, in Thailand, a lot of corporations are building huge pig farms in those countries, and bird farms in those countries for the advantage of their regulation, the more relaxed regulation. So if there is one country in particular that I will say that is pursuing this type of traditional agriculture, environmentally friendly type of agriculture, I could not point to one in specific. I just say that developing countries in general rely more on that type of agriculture. Sadly, all the process is going in the direction of combating, attacking, or reducing that type of agriculture, as the pressure of the global trading and profit is the main criteria.
I want to join answering this question as well. So I'm here from Kazakhstan. Kazakhstan is 9th largest country in the world. We have lots of flat land, steps. I mean, lots of land. We are so also scarcely populated. We only have 18 million people for the whole country, which is like one of the least populated countries in the world. And so we've been known for agriculture for many, many centuries. Like we have sheep, cows, horses. And we are probably one of the few countries that is first not dependent on imports for meat, for example, maybe milk products. And also we don't have those big farms yet. So as just you said, we're still one of those kind of like virgin type, original traditional type agriculture countries where like shepherds whose maybe fathers and grandfathers were shepherds, they have these flocks of animals and they live far away from civilization. Now they have, this wireless internet connection, which is kind of cool. So you could be out far from civilization with like 1,000 horses and 500 sheep. Typically a shepherd would have some horses, some cows, some sheep. So even like when it comes to domestic cattle animals,
and that's diversity.
Several types, yeah. And because we have so much land, we have enough grass for pastures. So they migrate throughout the year, so they eat grass here, then they move there and then eat grass there. So there's no containment. They're not binded to each other in a closely limited space. So that's kind of the part why like people here enjoy eating that kind of raised meat, which is raised like free, whatever, except for chicken, because chicken typically they need more organizing. Like there is a building for a chicken farm. So for chicken, it's kind of like a labor intensive in terms of human resources are needed to organize that process. But for like other types, bigger animals, it's really like the way it's done 1,000 years ago, we still have it in our country. And I'm thinking like maybe it will change, maybe as you said, in the direction of maybe, I hope actually with a positive note that more businesses will come to invest, because our land would have the capacity to grow more meat to feed more people. Like we could export meat. We even export our sheep's like skin to Italy, and then Italy's top brands like Gucci make expensive purses out of skin imported from Kazakhstan, the animal skin. So yeah, I mean, because as I said, we're not a very developed country. We're in a country in transition. We don't have our shepherds, our agricultural workers don't have the money to invest into big equipment and to have all this, very kind of organized and manner of doing this. So they don't look at it as kind of a organized business. They just do it as a trade, as an old style, and they export not too many. So like each business is not a giant corporation. It's just like, family owned or maybe group owned farms. So, so I actually think that I hope that, you know, more businesses, maybe from the West, maybe from outside the country, will come to invest and, you know, keep the good traditions, but also, you know, feed more people with the potential that we have here. So, yeah, thanks for letting me answer this as well.
Thank you, Ainur.
Yeah, and we don't have any more like questions typed to the chat. So yeah, I'm reminding to participants that we have a chat if you still have some questions. Somebody has shared a link to a file which seems to be a government website. So maybe we'll look at that a bit later. Anyone wants to join by voice, you can do it now. Does anyone want to say?
I also have questions here. Actually, sorry, I was not answering those.
You have private chat.
Oh, the picture of avocado reminds me that in
Oh,
my
that's
farm.
me. That's from
Oh,
the
okay,
beginning.
okay,
So I
okay.
was reading that chat. Yeah, I was writing that comment actually.
Okay.
Yeah. But is there anyone who wants to join us? If not, I think this was interesting. Like, I'm totally not specialized. I didn't study anything related to what you talked today in terms of animals, but I think this was kind of eye-opening to me. So I hope we all, as a group, as participants, learned from you. Professor Moreno, thank you for your time,
Thank
for your
you.
presentation.
Thank you, Ainur. Thank you, Crystal, and thank you everyone for the attendance.
One more comment here. Samuel Audley says, can we really feed the world without automating agriculture? Is it even possible? I mean, it's good ideas. Yeah,
I think the answer is yes. There is a movement toward consuming local. There is a movement. Okay, but independently of the fact that the possibility, the answer could be yes. I would say in theory it could be yes, but there are so much interest that I don't think that would be the case. But there is still this movement about consuming local, in which there is a growing awareness about the importance of having local markets and local farms and even urban farms. And if you do the calculations and you can, and you take in account the amount of biomass that it can be produced in those type of agriculture, and the amount of people, and then the math will tell, yes, oh yeah, there is more, it's more than possible to feed the entire population, the local. But those happy numbers need to go through a lot of realities, a lot of limitations that might not make that happy possibility to be a case, because there are always economical interests that dominate the logistics and may interfere with that possibility.
Yeah, okay, so I also want to voice my own thankfulness to Crystal Jones, who is Director of Development and Alumni Relations at Richard Fairbanks School of Public Health, who actually has organized this event today, but also all the events in the series. So I'm inviting everybody to participate in the next series, which is on March 5th at 12 o'clock noon, for a discussion hosted by the Department of Health Policy and Management. And with this, let's wrap up and thank all of you for participating today. Thank you, Dr. Moreno, again, as people are writing in the chat, that this was an important topic, and I agree with participants here. So I think this is a productive hour we've had today, and I want to join in thanking everyone for the hard work.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Bye. Bye, everyone.